All right, I'm going to get started because fun thing about me is that I massively underestimated how much I would talk about. So I booked myself a half-hour slot and I could have easily talked for an hour. So you're going to have to bear with me. I'm going to be going really fast. So hello, everyone. My name is Catherine Booth. We're going to be talking about the soft skills of good game design. So really quick bit about me. I've been in games for about 6 years. I've been doing design for about 4 of that. I've done generalist design, systems, level, technical narrative. I started out in marketing and communications, which is a bit of where this kind of comes from. I've spent time in teams of quite varying size, varying experience level, varying design resourcing, and I'm also neurodivergent. So that's kind of the lens that I have for talking about this. So a bit about you. This is for people who are game designers by title, but also people who might not have that title and do game design work. If you're a creative vision holder, if you're on a small team, if you're on a large team, hopefully this will help you. So this is game designer Gabby. She asks, how can I be a great game designer? When people ask this, especially sort of early career, mid-career kind of people, these are the kind of things that we tell them. You should have strong design theory, you should have a really good portfolio, you should be having good prototyping skills, making lots of small things rather than committing to a giant thing. Those are all good, but our communication skills are what can make or break us as technically proficient designers. Because what do game designers do all day? If you were to generalize, a lot of it is talking, a lot of it's communicating, a lot of it is sharing our vision with other people. So this is talking about our communication skills in a process of building a feature. There's kind of 5 things in here that I really wanted to talk about. There's even more, and I could probably do a talk on all of these things individually, but I tried to kind of build this into a little story to tell. So we're going to look at building a good feature spec, why it's important to do that, the structure, the alternative formats that you might go with, collaborating to implement it, learning what your other disciplines in your dev team need from you, seeking feedback, looking at the context of the sources of your feedback and the art of saying no to certain feedback, negotiating, also super important, and managing upward. There's a little sort of extra one in there about how we can make ourselves high value to our team. So starting with the first one, building a good feature spec. So why should we be creating feature and tool documentation? If we don't, we can end up with a lack of easily referenceable vision. We can end up with bus problems, knowledge silos, where you have one designer who knows everything and it's not written down and it's hard for everyone else to come together on it. We don't have receipts on our own decisions. It can be really hard to not have when someone's asked you a question about a feature and you've said yes, do this or that. If you haven't written that down, it can be really hard to reference it later. No definition of done. So if you're working on a feature but you don't have it written down somewhere, whether it's in a doc or a mirror or a presentation, what it looks like when it's complete, how do you know that you finished it? And finally, it's important to acknowledge that docs have purposes outside of just communicating what the feature is with your team, right? Eventually, you're going to need to be passing documentation to production. You're going to be needing to pass it to QA. You're going to probably have externals that need to know what the things in your game do and what they're intended to do. So that's why we should be doing it. So looking at that, we want to be structuring them well. So I couldn't go through a whole feature spec template, but I did write one anyway for you, and you can use that QR code to find it. It is at the end of the slides as well, so don't panic about getting your phone out too quick. But in lieu of going through the whole spec template, here's a few of my favorite tips for structuring them such that you get the most out of them for your team. So firstly, reading through from a viewer or a user or a reader's perspective a few times just to know that it flows well. It kind of sounds like I'm stating the obvious, but you'd be surprised how often it doesn't happen. And how much it can really improve what you're working on. Getting visual, drawing, photo bashing, making your bad design art, it makes it so much easier to convey what you're going for when people can just visually see it. Looking at alternative formats, you might find that a written doc is not the best thing for your team to get on board with. Presentation, a Miro board, a flowchart, any of those things are still useful and definitely still better than nothing. Using clear and concise English or whatever your studio language is. This doesn't come as a second nature for all of us, but we've got tools that can help us. You've got your spell check, you've got your Grammarly. Make use of those, because when you don't, it muddies your message that you're trying to give to people. We want to leave room for others to leave their mark on features and get inspired. And this is where you can get a bit, I don't want to say sneaky, but it's a really cool way to if you're aware of this, get your team on board by leaving room in your feature for them to leave their mark and get inspired and get invested on working on it. And finally, of course, structuring it. You want to have your goals and the must-haves of what that feature needs to do front-loaded and keep your nice-to-haves back-loaded. And I'll go into a little more about why that's useful to do later. So we've done a good feature spec. Now we need to collaborate with the team to implement it. Presenting aspects and doing a kickoff. This is ideal because it combats the no one reads my doc issue, which I'm sure that we've all heard at some point, much to many designers like sadness. You get everyone on the same page by being in the room together and creating a space for discussion. You're creating a space where your lead programmer can ask you questions about those weird edge case things. Your artists can ask you, okay, what are you actually envisioning from this? How much do you need from us? We can have that conversation together about it. But importantly, we want to be practicing that verbal delivery. I'm not necessarily meaning like, okay, you need to like sit in a room and have your other designers like listen to you talk about this thing that they kind of already know about. But I mean, giving yourself, and if you're in a more senior position, giving your juniors and mids the opportunity to do the presenting, it's really important because it's our time to hype the team up about whatever this feature is. It's our time to instill trust and confidence about what we're talking about, because when we present it in a way that's clear and fluid, it helps us show that we know what we're talking about and we have confidence in this feature and why it's important for the game. It also helps us drive focus on what the priorities of that feature are. So you can verbally call out the most important parts of what you want to happen in that feature, and you can downplay parts that are slightly less important that you don't want people to end up focusing on. So when we're communicating about what our feature needs to do, we kind of need to be learning our team's comms needs and adapting our approach a little bit differently. We want to be, there's more to this, but I picked two parts of it. So listening and observing, like their reactions, the kind of questions they're asking, and thinking about using different voices. This is a bit of a marketing thing, but using the right approach for the right audience makes quite a big difference. So in our listening and observing, if you're, for example, I'm a designer and I'm telling the programmer that I'm working with about what my feature does, if you're noticing different things about their reactions and the kinds of questions they're asking, you can adapt your approach to them to help it move faster and help them not get caught up on the small details when you want them to see the big picture. Or if they're zooming out really far, you can help them distill down, okay, I really want you to focus on this specific thing. Also, you'll find, and I'm not trying to pick on the programmers at all here, but I definitely find that you'll find that they often need, they're unlikely to infer specifics. You need to be direct about exactly what you need something to do, exactly what variables you want exposed for you to balance later. All of those kinds of things are really important. Some people, sort of the more creative folks, other designers, artists, will give you kind of what I call adding responses, where they're kind of actually adding to the scope of the feature and you need to kind of rein them in while still not like dampening their fire or anything about it. So it helps to provide some rails, create a specific outlet, like I mentioned earlier, creating a space for people to inject their own bit on that feature. When you've got that outlet for them, you can direct them towards it and provide them a railing so that you're not ending up having to say no to certain like extra things they're adding. You're going to find that you're dealing with people that have different awarenesses of different design thought processes, and you're going to just need to adapt your contact with them about it as necessary. So, using different voices. Again, this might sound like it's a little bit obvious, but I've noticed that there's definitely a difference in the way that you'll interact with your, like internally amongst your design team. You might be using more jargon, you might be speaking a lot less formally, you're going to be more open to feedback with them. To the wider team, you're going to be less jargony, probably a little more formal, a bit more decisive. It's going to be less, oh yeah, I think we could do this way. If they ask questions, we could do this or that. It's more like, this is exactly what we're doing. You're decisive about what your feature's meant to do. To production and other leads, you're going to be thinking about some extra details. So they're going to be more interested in things like the cost, the benefit, the risk of that feature, and you're going to want to be talking about those things up front and making them clear. And then when we're talking with external stakeholders, even with players, there would be separate voices I would use, but you're going to be using your most formal language. Minimal internals, you're going to be very decisive. So that's using the different voices in different contexts. So we're moving on to sort of seeking balanced feedback. This can be a little bit of a trap that I find it's easy to fall into as a designer or working on any creative project. So identifying when your feedback that you're getting is not really constructive enough. So if Gabby's like, I'm working on this really cool feature. I want to know what you think about it. And the feedback she's getting is, the game looks awesome. This prototype feels great. Those are all cool, but we want to know how it could be better, not just how great it is now, right? So we need to be aware of trying to seek balanced feedback. So we're going to find people will sometimes just say it was good when they don't have the mental bandwidth to say what they actually think. They might not have the time or the energy to actually go into detail about it. And it can be really helpful to use things like probing questions. What would you change about this? Not just what did you think? Be specific. What would you change about it? And then you can end up with people who are like, okay, I'm aware of the scope that you have. I know maybe you've only got a week left to work on it. I'll just say that it's fine because I don't want to go into heaps of, detail about it. So it can help to provide a razor, something like if you could change one thing only, that can really help people narrow their focus and be like, okay, I know that, given all of the perfect things in the universe were in place, here's the one thing that I would change. Even if you can't actually change that one thing, it can give you clues about how you could still implement that kind of feedback in your feature, even if you can't change that specific thing. You can look at the things around it that maybe you could change anyway, and it can give you clues about what are the issues with your feature. It can also be really helpful to identify amongst your team consistent sources of constructive feedback. So maybe there's one designer that you know that you can go to that will always give you a straight answer. Maybe you've got, and I find that I'm calling out the producers here, but often very honest, very direct, and you can usually get a very straight yes or no, we think you should do this out of those people. So whoever it is, whatever discipline they are, if you can identify them and you know that you can go to them when you need to hear something constructive rather than just, that was super cool. So we've talked a bit about finding constructive feedback, but we're often going to get into situations as designers where we're fielding feedback from the wider team. And this can be difficult for us because we're going to get a lot of, hey, wouldn't it be so cool if the game did this? Or the game would be so much better if X, Y, and Z. And for various reasons as designer, that can sometimes make us cry a little bit because we might have already thought about it. We might know that it's out of scope. We might know that it would be super cool, but for other balanced player experience reasons, we can't do it. So that's why dealing with this can be quite difficult, and it's useful to have some little tools up your sleeve to help you deal with it. And part of the reason that we get sad about it is because one of the foremost responsibilities of a game designer is protecting good ideas from other good ideas. And like I said, I find that people who are newer to games, people who are more junior, more mid, I feel like everyone kind of falls into the trap of like, oh, but we could do this, we could do that, we could add it and add things to this and make it more awesome. And you end up just like making, and scope is blowing out and out and out, and it's getting a bit terrifying. A game designer usually, has to be the person that protects whatever you originally thought of from all of those extra cool things. I'm sure that someone said this. I couldn't find an attribute. It's possible that I made this up myself, but I'd surely not. But yeah, a really good thing to keep in mind is that your job is to protect good ideas from other good ideas. So we want to be able to provide an outlet for this kind of feedback while maintaining our team's morale and protecting our game vision. So we have kind of two priorities here. The team needs to feel engaged with your whole game idea, with whatever feature you're working on. They need to be engaged with that, and they also need to feel psychologically safe to give you that feedback, because we don't want everyone shutting down and just not saying anything. On the other hand, designers need to be able to minimize distraction and also be able to feel okay about having to say no to these things, because that's part of our job. There are a couple of ways we can do this. We can be optimizing our sort of internal feedback process. We can do that by creating a designated feedback pipeline. So this could be like a regular meeting, or at the end of your sprint, you have a showcase, or you could have a pipeline where people direct that feedback towards their lead and then they discuss it with the design team, that kind of thing. A designated place for that to happen creates kind of a time box and an expectation where the designers can come and be like mentally prepared to receive this and deal with it and not be kind of hearing it from all sides at all the time. It's also really important, and if you have the bandwidth to do this, to keep the team as informed as you can about what things are open and being currently worked on and what things are closed, either to be worked on in the future or already worked on. And you can use a sprint or a milestone kickoff prezi to keep the wider team up to date on what's actually being worked on by your design team. So a Tales of the Shire example, let's say we can say, okay, design team's working on balancing our gardening at the moment. So that means that the rest of the team knows, okay, if I'm going to give feedback to design about whatever's going on in the game, I'll make sure that I'll look at gardening specifically. Not going to worry too much about telling them about the fishing being really difficult or the foraging being too hard to find a certain mushroom, that kind of thing. It gives them a bit of a boundary box of what things you need to hear about. It's also super important to be specific when you ask for it from everyone, what to feedback on. So, as I said before, if you can say, okay, we are working on gardening, we really want to hear what you think about how long it takes to grow X, Y, and Z plant. Or we want to think about what you think about, my mind's just gone blank, about how long your plants stay watered for, that kind of thing. You can give them specifics about what things you want to know about, and that way they stay engaged with giving you feedback on it. There's always going to be times where we have to say no, and it can be hard to do so, but there's a few little tricks that we can keep in mind to make it easier on us and easier on them. Super important to refer back to your pillars and your player motivations. And this is also why it's really, really important to have your whole team on board with building those in the first place, so that it's something that you guys can all collectively agree on, falling back on, knowing like, okay, our game's a cozy game. We want to make it about, one of our pillars is food is love. It's all to come back towards food and how that relates to the player. So falling back on your pillars and player motivations can help it prevent seeming like this is just what I think, but this is actually what the needs of the game are, and that's what we're trying to keep in mind. Taking the time to explain why, if you can, super helpful. Not always something we have the bandwidth for, but if you do have the time, it's really useful. And if it's something that you can change or you can act on, make sure that you let them know. Make sure that you create that kind of positive experience of giving feedback and having it acted on. So what is next? We're negotiating. This is something that we all have to do, particularly I find as designers, we have to sort of give something to get something sometimes, and there's a couple of different tricks that we can have to help with that. Olive branches, everyone's kind of heard of the concept of extending an olive branch, but giving something to get something in return can be handy if you've got to deal with, I don't know, say the artists on your team have created a bunch of decorations, and they're just like super cool things in the game, but they might not necessarily interact well with what the player expects. And as designers, you might have to say, okay, we might need to cut X, Y, and Z because maybe they imply function or something and you can't interact with items. Example, you might need to know what you can let the artists end up putting in the game and what things you are going to have to say hard no on. And that kind of transitions into our next point, which is knowing what hill you want to die on, know what things are really important to the game's vision and the player experience, and what things you can relax on makes it easier to come into these conversations. When we have to deliver bad news, just rip off the Band-Aid, don't waste anyone's time. You're definitely doing more of a disservice when you let it simmer, so just get it done. The last thing is the Overton window, and this is kind of where the diplomacy part comes in with this talk. Some of you might have heard of it, but it's basically where you come in with a pretty crazy, wild idea, knowing that it's probably going to get shut down, and then you can come back in with your slightly less crazy idea, but maybe still a little crazy, which is actually what you wanted. But because you've already led with that wild, crazy thing, people are going to be a bit more open to hearing the second thing. And it sounds like a bit of a psyop and it sounds a little bit sneaky, but it does work. And when you obviously got to use it with care, but it can be really helpful to kind of have that in the back of your mind. So we've done all of those things. I have just tried to, we have moved to the next slide, that's fine. So this is kind of tacked on the end because I couldn't make it fit into our little feature cycle here, but something that I wish that I knew earlier and that I hope for juniors and mids to kind of learn as they're coming up. And as I said earlier, these are all the kind of things that you can't learn them at uni. You can't learn them through a course. You can only kind of learn them by messing it up. So it's kind of what I'm hoping that we're getting with this talk. But managing up is about creating value of yourself to the people above you and to the rest of your team. It's kind of something that I think comes from like the corporate world, but the things I'm going to talk about are a little bit more game specific, or things that I noticed that I wish that we could do better. Structuring our communication, it's so helpful if you can front load your decision or problem and then concisely offer solution options for your lead's consideration, and avoiding that sort of back and forth. So kind of examples I have here, like, hey, do you have a second to talk? And then you have to go back and forth with them about when they have time and what the thing is about. And it could all just be alleviated if we skip straight to the best case, where you can say, here's my issue, X thing has an edge case, here's the thing that's happening. I've already considered our options. I think they're A or B. Here's why I think B. I've considered the needs of the project. I've considered what time scope we have. I've shown that I'm taking initiative about what's actually going on above what's happening at my station. I think it'll be the least risky and it preserves the intention of our future. Example, what do you think? And then your lead can come in and look at this and go, okay, they've given me all the information. I don't need to follow up about certain things. And they can say, you should do A, or yes, you should do B, or they can suggest some third other thing, but you've made it so much easier and faster for them to onboard with whatever you need their help about. Some more managing up tips. Learning their communication preferences. You might find some people need one big chunk of communication during the day, or you might have better access to them and you can talk to them more throughout the day, figure out what they like to do. Knowing yourself and communicating those needs that you have. Knowing what information you need from them. So for me, that's things like, what are the constraints of this problem? What time frame do we have? What's the complexity of it? Do you want an essay? Do you want dot points? Do you just want to have a conversation? That kind of thing. And it's incredibly important, the priority of it. Because for me, when you present any new task to me, it's going to become immediately the most important thing I need to do. I need to go and ask for, should this come before or after whatever I'm currently working on? So when you know those things, you're in a position where you can succeed without needing to go back to them or missing out on those things. We want to be solution oriented, so it can be easy to kind of go to your lead and just like complain about stuff. But when you come with a solution suggestion, it shows that you care enough to have thought ahead about what things you could do to improve the situation. And obviously taking initiative. This is not just anticipating needs and self-delegating, but when you're finished with your tasks and you go, okay, what could I be doing next? Hey, lead, I'm done. What's next on our list? They have to like context switch from whatever they were dealing with to like figure out what's on your workload, what needs to happen next, and what to give to you. If you can think to yourself, okay, I'm done with my thing. Look around you. What's the next thing that needs to happen with the speech, or what the needs of the project are? What's going on? And you can suggest 1, 2, 3 things, and they can pick from those. It will speed up their process so much more, and they'll really love that you've taken the time to do that. So I managed to speak pretty quickly. We did it. So this is just like a little wrap up of different communication skills and process. I will say that, like I said earlier, I started writing this talk and there was like about 5 or 6 other things that I had to exclude because I just couldn't fit it all in. They could each be their own talk. But yeah, that's that. So thank you. I've got a link to the slides if you want to look at them. I've got a link to my feature spec template if you want to look at that. Hopefully the QR codes will work, but if they don't, you can email me. Yeah, we should have time for questions. No question askers?
Hello.
Hi.
I'll kick us off. Question, when you're going through the design process and you emphasizing all your communications, what do you find to be the biggest challenge when communicating with different departments?
Yeah, so this is kind of what I was coming into with different voices for different audiences. It can be, that can definitely be a disciplinary based thing. Like I said earlier, I kind of called out the programmers, but a lot of the time you need to be mindful of the specifics. They're not going to make inferences about, like in your mind, you kind of just know, well, of course it would be this way or it should be like built that way. You need to be specific about what you want. So that's something to keep in mind with for them. Artists, it really depends on your team and what kind of people you have. And this is why I was kind of trying to get into not just getting to know your departments, but getting to know the people within them. Because you might find that they're the kind of, I mean, maybe the artists are like super creative and they're so keen to like build stuff and you have to kind of slow them down. Or they could be the kind of like, whoa, this is going to result in so many extra assets and get a bit freaked out. It's just about reading it and practicing learning what each of those different sets of people need. The mic is oh, there it is.
Hello.
Hi.
I would like to ask about hills to die on.
Sure.
What do you do when you get a hard no?
Yeah.
Of you? Just-
So it's hopefully it depends on your team structure. It depends on your role. Like if I was personally in a situation where I was like, okay, we really can't have this happening in the game, I would take it up to my lead and say, I need you to help, like, come into bat on this for me, and I need to go to our leads, and you guys need to have a conversation. I've sat in some rooms where I've witnessed those very hard conversations happening, and it's literally just a back and forth, and they literally eventually just come to an agreement, and you have to kind of just do the best you can with it. I think that, like I said earlier, coming back to the pillars of your game and reminding people of that, coming back to your player motivations and reminding people of that too. And that's, again, why it's really important to have as much of the whole team. I mean, at minimum, your leads should be on board with it, but your whole team aware of what those player motivations and your pillars are. So you can say, this is not just my opinion, this is what's going to happen, and show them the cause and effect of if you were to do X, Y, Z thing. Yeah, that's the best I can probably tell you.
Thank you.
Cool.
Could I actually ask a question?
Sure.
Just for people maybe coming into the games industry with like a first job, do you have any advice for them to be able to find that sort of room for negotiation and communication when you're sort of trying not to stand out or embarrass yourself or something?
I would say that negotiation is more something for juniors and new entrants to be aware of, but it's not that I wouldn't expect them to be having to have these conversations themselves, unless you're like, I mean, you probably will actually. If you're in say you're in a group of students together and you're building something, you're going to have those negotiation situations, and you kind of have to just have confidence that whatever you're building, whatever you're working on, is going to be the right thing for the game. And again, coming back to your pillars and your player motivations, and as much of the design work as you've done so far to think through that issue that you're going forward with, that you're trying to have a conversation about. There's really something to be said for, I remember when I was a junior, I was like, it's so hard to have confidence in your own ideas and that what you're doing is the right thing for the game. But if you do the best that you can to prove it out, like create a little prototype, create like a couple of different tests if you're trying to balance something, and you can go to people and say, here it is, here's option A, B, or C, here's why I think we should go with A, B, or C. And also lean on the fact that, like, you're the designer, like, you're there because you have that expertise and you have that lens that everyone else doesn't necessarily have. Because it takes, like, in every game project, you're going to have conflict, you're going to have discussions and negotiations and things, and it's sort of like, if those aren't happening, then people don't care enough. Like, of course you're going to have those situations happening, and it's learning to handle those even from the very beginning when you're doing your little student projects and you're working on something with your friends. Starting that out as soon as you can is so useful to kind of have that practice. I hope that helped.
Thank you. That's all. Oh, one more.
If you're working in a studio and you've made like half a dozen prototypes and that sort of thing, and you've got a couple of different viable options, and people are really passionate about different things, and the room's kind of split, how do you go about navigating that negotiation?
I would expect that if I've gone through that process and I've created, like, let's say 6 different prototypes, I'm probably going to have binned a couple already because I'm going to realize that they're not viable. So I'm not going to, like, deal with presenting them. But if you're getting like equal feedback from all of them, I would expect that you have a favorite that you know is the right thing for the game. And I guess it kind of comes back to, like, trusting your own instincts a little bit, because you're not going to get like, you're not going to have, it's your job to be able to say, this is what the right thing is for us to move with, and your job to kind of consult on what you think is the best option, rather than expecting that to come from someone else, I guess. So I feel like this is kind of a non-answer, but it really, I would say that if I were in that position, I would kind of already know which one I like the most. And my thinking would be of, like genuinely hoping that everyone goes for that one. And if they don't, then I would be making a case for why I think that one and kind of going from there. Yeah. Cool. I think we're all good. Nice. Thank you so much for coming.